I have a huge question. Is that Ulysses S. Grant in the background, or is that Nick Offerman?
Neither. Ulysses.
Okay.
Wow. No, it is. It's Herman Melville.
Oh, okay. That makes way more
Oh!
sense. Okay, cool.
Rhyme or free, it doesn't matter to me. It's my bad poetry. Good day, and welcome to My Bad Poetry, a podcast where we take a deep dive into our poems from youth, yesteryear, or even yesterday, always asking the question, why in the world did I write this? I'm Aaron.
And I'm Dave.
And today we return from our mid-season hiatus with the author of Yours Creature, which I am grateful for, if only for the fact that it gives me a reason to say epistolary on this podcast without talking about the Apostle Paul. Jessica Cuello, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to give you the word epistolary.
It's such a
great
fun word. Yes.
It really is. I've said it more this year than I have my entire life.
Yeah.
I don't regret it.
Most recent collection is all in the styles of epistolary poems. They're letters from Mary Shelley to her mother, her dead mother. And I don't know. I read it yesterday for the Seeley Challenge, and it was just a fascinating read. I did not know all the details of her life. Kind of a tragic story in and of itself.
Yeah. Painful life.
Yeah.
The first 20-something years of her life, most of the pain occurred during that time. And that's the time that the book focuses on.
So what drew you to kind of Frankenstein and Mary Shelley? Is it your love of the classics?
I mean, I do. We were talking about Melville before. So I do have a love for that century. It actually was a book that came to me by accident between other poems. And it was a book that came very quickly because I couldn't sleep at night. I had insomnia, and I discovered that reading fiction and poetry was just too stimulating. So I went to the library and I thought, I'll just get a lot of really dry nonfiction essays and literary biographies, and they'll put me to sleep. And one of the biographies I got was a dual biography by Charlotte Gordon. She's a wonderful biographer. And the dual biography means she went back and forth between Mary Shelley and her mother, the feminist and activist Mary Wollstonecraft. And she sort of drew parallels between their two lives. And it's beautifully written, and it was deeply stimulating. And I just started writing the poems. I don't think I knew until after I wrote the book why I was drawn to it. I think the poems taught me more. I think I was drawn more to thematic elements than I do love writing historical work, but I would think I was drawn to thematic elements because I hadn't read Frankenstein since I was about 19 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't read Wollstonecraft since I was in college. I mean, nobody really reads her for fun.
No.
I read her in an 18th century literature class, amazing class. But I had forgotten about her until this biography.
Wow. That's so cool.
That is awesome. I love that as a concept, just because, again, Mary Shelley is one of those people that makes me feel a little bit like a failure, because she is just one of those incredibly talented, like, she wrote Frankenstein at, like,
18, yeah.
At 18. Like, that's amazing. And that is one of those books that I think I've read that 3 or 4 times, and every time I go back to it, it hits me with something new and really forces me to consider my own fear of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. Like, it's really a good story. And it's also just kind of funny how then you get all of the movies that take out the interesting parts, and they're just like, no, it's a monster now. That's all we're talking about. That's the only thing.
Yeah, it definitely holds up. When I reread it, I loved it, and I loved it in very different ways. I don't think it should feel like a failure. Um, you
No,
know,
I'm here to be self-deprecating. That's all I can do.
I'll let you do that, but that I think that these people, Shelley and Byron, and maybe all people of that time were forced to reach adulthood at a much sooner age. And you could argue they didn't have childhoods, they didn't have teenagehood
Right.
to explore, to be cared for. And so I think that, there's this artistic explosion at a very young age, although I'm not as crazy about the novel she wrote when she was an adult.
Huh.
So I,
Yeah.
I don't know if those measures, when we think about, oh, someone did something young, I don't know if those measures really matter, because we evaluate what is a life and how is a life lived. And I think, she was, I think now I've been thinking this more and more when she wrote that book. I think she was pissed at Percy Shelley,
Mm-hmm.
who, when she had 4 children and only one survived. And he really abandoned her during her grief. And he ran from their infant after it died, like he was repulsed by it. And which is what Victor Frankenstein does to the monster. It just abandons it. I mean, there's all kinds of layers of abandonment in her life.
No.
But I think it's a novel coming out of grief. It's a novel coming out of anger and her own pain. Yeah, it's great. It's a good book. My students like it. I teach French now, but when I taught English, I would always put it on a free choice reading list, and kids still groove on it. So yeah.
Nice.
That's cool.
Well, Dave, it's your time to hit us with something new.
Oh, yeah.
And so how about you bring us into the realm of poetry? What do you have to share for us today?
I've got a poem called Riding a Unicycle.
Ooh.
We've taken now a month away. Time for work, for rest, for play. My writing grows with leaps in time. You can tell by this sublimeful meter. Ooh, that couplet was really rough. I hope to write much better poetry. Maybe I need an editor or talent. The end, I guess? Yeah. I liked the concept of like riding a bicycle, but like a bicycle with one fewer wheel that I've never ridden before and don't really understand.
Nice.
I could use more play, so
Hmm.
I appreciate your unicycle poem.
Well, thank you.
I feel like this is the high school teacher coming out of you.
I'm
Like
sorry.
Right?
encouraging creativity.
No. I need a little bit of encouragement after that poem. Just like, yeah, if you try harder, maybe you'll get somewhere with it. Maybe it'll develop into something. But yeah, you really like A for effort. B minus for effort.
Yeah. I think I don't mean to get all serious, but Sandy Howe is she's one of my favorite writers. And she actually has this gorgeous poem about teaching is about allowing failure. I think you kind of nailed it there. And not all teachers allow for that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, speaking of failure, this is why we have you on the show to share.
Wow.
I take a segue any way I can find it.
You're a monster, and I love you, Aaron.
You have given us poems here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, which one would you like to start us out with?
Oh man. Well, I will first tell you why I picked them, and then maybe we can go from there.
Okay.
So the first two, I didn't want to go back to my youth because I felt like that was unfair to my young self. And maybe like I'm being a teacher to myself. Like I just can't judge young people creating things, even myself. So I actually took the first two poems are from a book that came out in 2021 called Liar.
Okay.
There is a series of poems in this book that are based on misspellings. And they're about the child's voice, and they're words that actually were misspelled on student work. And I wrote poems from them. And I wrote maybe 20 or 30 of these. And in the book, there are only about 9. So a lot of the poems I didn't put in the book. So I took 2 misspelling poems that I think failed, rejected from my book. And then I've got 2 epistolary poems that I also did not include in Yours Creature. And then I just have like a poem from that I wrote like 2 years ago recently. So all of this stuff is pretty recent, and it's stuff that, I thought it might be interesting to show how when you write a book, you might write quadruple the number of poems, and then you end up really distilling out work. And I'm a slasher, like Yours Creature, even on the final hour of edits when it was ready to go to publication, I took out 4 poems.
Oh wow.
Really?
Like I'm sort of brutal and ruthless with my work, and I just don't want any poem that is not what I think of as quality, whatever that means. But so I have almost every book I write could have been 3 times as long, but you don't want to read that. So that's what I've shared with you. So I don't know if
Yes. Dave, I know what I want to start with, but
Well, I mean, as a terrible speller, well, as both of us being terrible spellers, we might need to start with one of those.
So I'm kind of curious. I don't know if can you see the poems, right?
Yes.
So this is the game I would play when my colleagues would bring me these words just on a slip of paper, and they'd say, "What do you think this word was supposed to be?" I'm curious. So for the listeners, it's Conchence. What do you think that was supposed to be?
I was struggling with this for a second because you said that you started to teach French as well. And like, I was trying to go into like languages here, and I went towards like Italian.
No.
And I'm like, Conchence.
So I started teaching full-time French 4 years ago, but 5 years ago I was teaching actually was a community college like composition course that students could take as seniors. So these were seniors, not to shame them. It's definitely not making fun of them. So this was not anything to do with language.
Right.
Any guesses what word that student was trying to write?
Well, being a terrible misspeller myself, I mean, sounding it out in my head, it's conscious, like one's brain, one's mind, right? The conscious thought.
Yeah, conscience. Your
Conchence.
like,
Yeah.
your conscience, like your angel on one's shoulder, devil on the other.
Your Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah, conscience. I loved this one. These misspellings gave me so much delight.
Yeah.
Them by my bed in an envelope for 3 years. And I loved this one, but I wish I had written the poem that could have gone in the book, because I thought the word was so rich. And like one reason these are in the book is because I was so interested in that moment of apprehension when you understand what's happening from the language, like your ear hears it before your eye. So I was sort of interested in that kind of way that children perceive language in reality. But then the poem is what it is. Okay, so I'm just delaying reading this bad poem. So you want me to read it, right?
Yes. Yes,
okay.
Yes, please.
Conchence. When I was made of nothing, I walked home from school with 2 boys who were my company because I let them touch me. One stopped to take pictures of a dead squirrel. The squirrel knees bent like a lady. His mouth was a little drill of teeth. You came out from a house and stared at us. My conscience felt you. You looked like someone's mother. It was April. You folded your arms, the sweater closed against you. You stared at me, at the squirrel belly and skin, at the matted fur. The guts were pink and swarmed with smaller life. You watched us, and I had to move from you, out of your sight, behind the boys who were fascinated with the dead.
A little dark, I'll say that.
I should have warned you like before I was on this show, and you guys are really fun. And like every time I speak, I feel like it's
No.
you bring the darkness with me. Just warning. Yeah.
I love it. I think this is a great poem because I am so confused.
Yes. So that's one reason I think it's a bad poem. That's the number one reason, Dave, that it's a bad poem is it's confusing and it's too dense and it's full of too much information and it's all sealed off and it has a narrative and it has something else happening. And it's a poem that's just got way too much stuff crammed inside it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that's its like numerical flaw, you know.
Yep.
But I like how convoluted that can be because it feels like my thought process when I feel like someone is judging me.
Interesting.
So like I'm walking down the road with a couple of people and someone steps outside and instantly my brain goes to, what are they thinking about me? Does it look like I am just walking down the street? Do they think I'm going home? Do they think I'm causing a problem? Do they think it's weird that I'm staring at this squirrel with these two other kids? Is it like, so it feels rambly, but in a way that kind of makes sense with anxiety.
That's actually kind of what's happening in the poem.
Yeah.
That's a pretty spot on assessment of the narrative. So, okay,
Well,
great.
Yeah, well
there we
done,
go.
Dave.
You nailed it.
And it's funny because I wrote this poem near an old neighborhood I used to live in the city of Syracuse. And when the city kids would come out of the school, a lot of the people in the neighborhood who are part of Syracuse University are somewhat apprehensive. Like they live in the city, but they're not that comfortable with race and poverty and the kids in the city being loud in groups and pausing. And you can see sometimes if like a group of kids stops in front of someone's house, the person in the house is uncomfortable. I know that's not really in the poem. So I think this poem is just like all of these churning things that I'm not even sure are able to get at. But part of it is, and that's why when I say Aaron, you got or Dave, the judgment. Why are kids? There's always an apprehension of teenagers too.
Yeah.
I think people view teenagers as an other, as something menacing and dangerous, especially when they're in groups. And certain people just don't like them stopping in front of their home.
Right.
And the dead animal has there's this curiosity with the body and the innards of the body and death, and which is something people do, right? They stare at carcasses, and it's dark.
It does feel like it could be the opening of a horror movie. Like just or a coming of age movie. I mean, you could really go quite a few ways with this.
I mean,
that could be the same? Isn't that the same genre, really?
Yeah.
Very true.
I was gonna say, true. What is that? Stand By Me? That's all about them, and that's Stephen King. So
trying to find the dead body, right?
Yeah.
What I'm trying to think if there's anything else we can pick at, like this squirrel belly and skin.
Oh.
Hey, the image is there.
Aaron,
I'm just reading it off the screen.
I do like the description of the squirrel. Knees bent like a lady. Like a dead squirrel, like, what's it called? Not bowing, but curtsying.
Yes.
That is a terrifying and disturbing image, and I kind of love it.
Well, you know how squirrels do have those ladylike knees.
Right.
Like cats.
Do they?
Oh yeah.
Okay, okay. I guess I haven't explored or I haven't looked at a squirrel in a while. I guess I don't know.
Look, there's nothing ladylike in squirrels. They're pretty awful. I watch them a lot. They do have that ladylikeness to their knees, like a cat does when it's folded.
Hmm.
But they're rarely, they're not always still. They're such frenetic animals. I mean, they're always running around in my backyard. But
Yeah.
I think if I salvaged anything from the poem, it would just be the description of the squirrel.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and a little drill of teeth. Again,
Mm-hmm.
it's that the curtsying of a lady and a mouthful of drill-like teeth, and yeah, like they seem like gentle creatures, but also I don't want to get too close to one.
They've got a bite. Well, now I'm curious. I have no clue what the second misspelled word is. So for our dear listeners, the second poem here, based on a misspelling, is Achers.
Arches, but really misspelled.
Mhm. So you have to think sonically, like phonetically. That's
A-
how kids, well, not kids, but teenagers and kids.
Achers.
I
Uh,
just read the first line of the poem and now I know.
Yeah, it's acres.
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 Yeah.
Oh, ooh, I would never have gone there.
Right? That. Wow.
Let's hear acres.
Okay. Oh, this one's so bad it hurts me, but this is for me. This is good. Okay, acres. My brother owns the acres past the house. We sleep to stop, we sleep to hide, to unsee. He says, don't count the acres. He says, property is no good. My brother is the one to own or sell. He never stooped, never touched. My brother of the walkout, of the spit and ankles. My brother with the girl upstairs. He has the acres are his. They come with the father, they go to the oldest. The acres are full of leaves, bamboo, and fir, snow on every limb and leaf. Don't follow me, says my brother. We are not the acres. I had a brother, a father. We had acres, a field of stalks. Out the window, I saw him sell. I saw him give away. I sleep to stop. I sleep to dream and hold my brother still. This is pretty bad.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to agree so quickly.
You're mean, Aaron.
I mean, that's what you asked for.
Yes.
That's what I brought with me.
And you have provided. Oh, wow. Okay. Whereas the other misspelled poem, you had Conchence show up once.
Yeah.
Acres is all over this place. Do you remember kind of the context behind what inspired this, or that conscious choice of putting acres so often throughout?
I was thinking of the acres as a kind of representation of inheritance of land and a home,
Okay, yeah.
not the sister, and
Hmm.
loss. And because a lot of these poems are sister voices. So in the context of the book, it works a little better, but where the sister is negated and the brother is given, but the brother is rejecting what's given. And so the sister
Mm.
also has nothing and she has no brother. And that's like what I wanted the poem to do. That's not what the poem does. It was asking a lot of a poem. It was a poem that the interesting thing about the misspelling poems is that they wanted to be lyrical poems. All the poems in the book are lyric, but some of the poems required a narrative. So there is this The poems that failed are the poems where the lyric and the narrative never met each other. And so it was either, the best poems of this series are the poems where the lyric and the narrative just sort of came together like a beautiful marriage. And I'm partial to lyrics, so I never ended up for this particular book sacrificing lyric for narrative. So the poems where I needed to really get after a little more exposition failed. And so I just kept them out. I was like, okay, you're not going to be, I could have revisited some. I also just wrote and then I never went back. And this was one that I just, I brought you my bad poem.
Yes.
What to do? You have no idea how painful this is for me because I am a perfectionist and I don't even read poems at readings that aren't like in books. Like I'm very I will go over something 1,000 times before I share. So you're really getting my failures here.
Well, we are very honored for that.
We are, yes.
I think it's cool. It's healthy and cool. Yeah.
It's healthy and cool, but also painful.
It is. And
it's really hard.
It could end up being really awful. It just depends how it's approached, I think.
Yeah. We try to approach it with fun and just kind of with like, hey, what was going on here? And oftentimes we come out with a seed of like, yeah, that does make sense.
I think it's a really cool premise to look at what makes a poem not work.
Sure.
You learn a lot. So cool. It's a cool idea, you guys.
Well, thanks.
But poets are so sensitive. You're like people without skin.
That should be a poem.
That is a poem, actually.
Oh, really?
Come on, Aaron.
Is it? Oh, no.
Well, no, it's just the line. You don't need to know
I'm showing my naivety.
No, you're not.
People without skin? What is that from?
Well, he doesn't say that directly, but there is a line in an Octavio Paz poem.
Oh, that's why Dave knows it.
I've altered it for the purposes of our.
Sure. Okay, so the italics words here. Don't follow me, my brother says. We are not the acres. So I always find that a fascinating choice within poetry is like we have so many things within the English language that are like, by rule, this is how we show a quotation. We have quotation marks. But poetry is that one place where we can just kind of play and throw all the rules out and reconstruct with new rules. That's one of the many reasons why I've grown to truly love poetry, because being a rule follower, it challenges me in ways to be creative. So is it common, and again, I'm showing my naivety here, but is it common to do italics words for, it is? Okay.
And it's been common a long time, yeah.
Fascinating.
Not everybody does it, but it's definitely the norm instead of quotation marks. No, I feel like I should pull some books off my shelf so we can see.
Yeah.
Send us a summer reading list. We'll get right on it.
Give us the bibliography and we'll...
And I think it's more fluid.
Do you think it's poets' aversion to punctuation marks in general?
I love punctuation marks. I know you don't believe it because these poems have none.
They don't.
I think our relationship with punctuation marks is different. Other writers, and not necessarily, I think good prose writers have a similar relationship with punctuation marks, but punctuation marks are as important as the space in a line. And they're often as important as your word choice. I wrote this book. I realized this part wasn't recorded, but I was telling you before that I had this book that's a response to Moby Dick, a feminist response. And before that book was published, my editor wrote to me saying we would like to change like 20 commas.
Ooh.
And I was so upset. I
Huh.
mean, I was so upset. I like wanted to pull the book, which is really immature. And it was commas. I I reached out to 3 poets, like, what do I do? My commas. And we resolved it. And the editor, she's awesome. And she told me that she actually couldn't sleep for a few nights over this comma situation.
Wow.
And it's funny because, I think a lot of only poets are going to notice the absence of the comma or the addition of the comma. But it's attention to breath and attention to pause. And so, and speech, attention to speech, I think with the italics, the speech happens so quietly that you're not distracted by the way dialogue in a short story or a novel kind of calls attention.
Mm-hmm.
To the store, he said, quotation mark. But when the speech is embedded with italics, it's like imprinted on the words. I actually have never had this conversation with anyone about why I prefer italics. But it's definitely a deep aesthetic preference. When I'm workshopping other people's poems and I see things in quotation marks, I sometimes want to change it. But I think that there are reasons why you would want quotation marks too. They do a different kind of attention to the words. They point to themselves.
Yeah.
And quotation marks, people use them a lot to
Yeah.
indicate something's not genuine, that's not real. We use our fingers to say, this is what's said, this is what's done. But italics mean the voice is there inside the line.
I love that. Wow.
That is really fascinating because I dislike commas, but I overuse colons and semicolons in everything that I write, and it is very weird. Like
I love semicolons.
it's so good.
I love them. I've had people remove them from my writing. I think you can actually psychoanalyze people through their punctuation use.
Okay.
I think I could understand a lot about you because of your colon and semicolon. Maybe as much as your dreams, your astrological sign, because it's a choice.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
I think it's just because I'm not a great writer. So I end up overusing it because I can't come up with other ways to avoid it.
They have a good purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you diss yourself, Dave.
Come on.
Speaking of choices and purpose, within this, going back to the poem, one couplet or stanza that took me out entirely, and maybe you can explain it back in to its role here, or maybe this is one of the reasons why you think it's bad. I'm just curious. Bamboo and fur, snow on every limb and leaf. Where'd the bamboo come from?
Sadly, there's a lot of bamboo around here.
Oh.
Invasive. And so it takes over. People brought it in like as a decorative order. I don't know where you guys are. I didn't.
Oh, sorry. We're in Minnesota.
Okay, so people haven't brought bamboo to Minnesota.
No.
We do have a fair amount of kudzu, which is a regional variation of a bamboo.
You say kudzu? I say kudzu.
Kudzu. It's Japanese.
It's okay, kudzu.
Come on.
Sorry.
Unacceptable. I mean, there are acres and acres of it just all around Minnesota. You should know this by now, Aaron.
Where are you?
I'm in New York State. I did live in San Antonio for a while, and there was some there. And I've seen it in New York. I mean, I've seen it enough that it's in the poem, and it's pretty incongruous with fur. And it doesn't, that's a sloppiness of the poem. Why I think it's bad. I think if I'm going to talk about an invasive species, you have to do more with it. You have to talk about that. So that would maybe be another poem. But things running wild in a property that's being given away, like a property that maybe is losing its value, that no longer has, you know.
So it's compounding neglect.
Yeah.
Neglect of the sister,
Yeah,
neglect of the young.
yeah.
Yeah.
Ah,
And a generation that doesn't want to own something that requires much labor.
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But that's not really in the poem, even though, thank you for seeing it. It's not. I mean, that's great interpretation. That's what I would have done if I think I had spent a lot more time with this one. Yeah.
Oh, oh, okay. Normally we do two, but I mean, you've given us so much to work with here, and you said that your last poem here, Smite, you just said it was like a crappy poem, just without any further explanation.
Yeah.
So could you please read this for us?
Okay. So this one says, Smite. Moths have nested in my books with their powder gold, wings like gossamer, whatever that is. They are easy to kill, and I do. I smear them under my finger as if I have a power I never believe I do, but I do. My mother said once in front of a stranger that I didn't care for power. I never want to kill, but power does not always mean killing, and my mother did not know me.
Again, more murder. I'm just learning so much about English teachers now.
I'm gonna say, out of the three, this is my favorite. And not as a bad poem, but as like, I like what's going on here. So I'm very curious as to what do you dislike about this poem?
Yeah.
I think the craft is weak.
Okay.
I don't think there's a lot of poetry in it. There's a little narrative piece about killing the moths, and then it's connected to power. It's sort of explaining. And I'm intrigued with there were these moths in all of my books that I had to kill. And I think this material would be better served as a like a little creative nonfiction flash piece.
Hmm.
I think it's a very narrative. I think it is about ideas of power, but I think it's just too pat. It's too forcing it into the short line doesn't serve.
I do like the one line of wings like gossamer, whatever that is. Because I enjoy when creative people who choose their words extremely carefully go, yeah, whatever. I think that's kind of cool. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think it kind of shows the almost the carelessness of like, this is a life that I'm just gonna smudge out, like
Yeah.
gone, death. And it's like whatever that was. I mean, it kind of shows the inconsequential, seemingly inconsequential nature of that action.
Right.
It's a throwaway line.
Yeah.
So no, I agree. I like that line. I like that
Yeah.
line a lot.
Well, maybe I'll save that for if I do a prose piece on it.
There you go. I do like the powder gold and then smushing with fingers. So, like powdering and crushing and grinding. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of a cool thing to play around with, too.
And I liked kind of the play of powder and power, whether intentional or not. It is kind of a nice little, like how flimsy or fragile the powder gold was because of one's power, even if it's in like a thumb. But
You guys are gonna make me want to rewrite this.
well, this has been really fun, Jessica. I hope you've had fun sharing your wounded creatures with us here.
It's hard for me, I'm not gonna lie, but I'm kind of feeling proud that I did it. So
You did a wonderful job.
Yes, you should do this more often.
you're definitely the good cop to the bad cop of Dave,
Right?
I think.
I'm the nice one, except when it comes to me talking about Aaron's poetry, in which case I am a bit of an executioner.
Yeah. Well, Jessica, we have to wrap up this creature feature. But before we, Dave, it was my best. Not my
I
best.
closed
Not my
my eyes so
best.
that you wouldn't see my eye roll, because I think they actually flipped to the back of my skull
Okay,
there.
it wasn't my best transition. I'll admit that. But
I like it.
okay,
I'm,
yeah,
I'm, I'm doing it.
okay, good. But before we let you go here at My Bad Poetry, we end each week with the words of a true poet. So, would you be willing to share with us another one of your poems?
Sure. I will just read um, the first poem in Yours Creature. This is, again, it's an epistolary poem in the voice of Mary Shelley, writing to her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. And little fact, her mother died a little about a week after she was born, I think 13 days. So she didn't know her mother. So this poem, actually, the book begins at her birth. Dear mother, I wanted to crawl back into the black interior of you, womb scratched by an animal, but they wouldn't let me. I hung apart like gallows men, dangling for sweet touch. A line from the red radius of your womb went dark. That night, the whole of London raised its eyes to watch the comet pass, except for us. Instead, my currish cry and snarl, my cuss, my cut and run, my cutting tooth made death a custom house. Your daughter, Mary Shelley. And there was a comet, a famous comet did go through the sky the night of her birth. That was identified by Carolyn Herschel.
Hmm.
Just a strange little fact.
Nice.
That hits harder the second time.
That's better than your other poetry, I'll say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, that went through it. That went through the draft. So
Yeah.
it made it into the book.
Yeah. And just I mean, having read through it all, the fact that she lost 3 of her own children and almost died in childbirth herself, to revisit one's own traumatic childbirth and think that in some part her birth played the death. I mean, played a role in the death of her mother. I mean, you really do kind of dig deep into the psyche there, and yeah, anyone who can get your hands on Yours Creature should.
Thank you. Thank you for getting my, that's exactly what's happening in that poem. So I appreciate it.
This has been My Bad Poetry.
Now go write some of your own bad poetry. You know, every poem determines its form, I think.
I
So
love how much of a teacher you are. Aren't you on summer break? Like,
it's really deep. I think it's because you're young too and super sweet. I don't know. You're both millennials, right? Or...
Yeah. Rhyme free doesn't matter to me.